Hi everyone, I'm Isabelle. Let me tell you about something that happened. Again, I wasn't invited to my family's annual gathering. This has been going on for a decade. 10 long years of strained silence, meticulously edited photographs, and vacant chairs bearing my unspoken name. They've always claimed I was overly sensitive, emotionally distant, and prone to drama. But this year, I didn't even bother fighting for a place at their table. I purchased the entire beachfront property instead. Utter my name or depart. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Please share in the comments. I read every single one. Mondays typically aren't this jarring. They usually start with lukewarm coffee, a half-eaten granola bar, and a mountain of work emails that I happily ignore until after my second cup. But this morning was different. The Miller Family Beach Retreat 2025 Minost RSVP now. My breath hitched. I clicked before I could second-guess myself. Everyone was included in the email chain. Abigail, Ethan, Aunt Clara, even Cousin Derek, who's been absent since the Obama administration. But my name? Nowhere to be found. Not in the body of the email. Not on the initial list. Not even a simple typo. It wasn't a simple oversight. I was deliberately excluded. Completely. I stared at the screen as if it had struck me. There they were. Dozens of replies, casual banter, reminiscences from the previous year. Someone even posted a picture of the bonfire at sunset, the very same bonfire where I roasted marshmallows at the age of 8. Before I understood that love within this family came with conditions and expiration dates, I scrolled down, foolishly hoping for a second email, a correction, anything. But I knew better. This wasn't unprecedented. Last year's invitation must have gone to spam, Abigail explained when I called her, tears streaming down my face. You know how technology can be, she added with a chuckle, as if my erasure from the family calendar was merely a software glitch. I closed the email thread and sat there, stunned. My office suddenly felt too vast, too sterile. The framed diploma on my wall seemed to belong to a stranger. The sunlight reflecting off the Los Angeles skyline felt cruelly ironic. California sunshine paired with an icy void in my heart. A turquoise glass seashell. It rested on the second shelf, behind outdated industry publications, and a neglected succulent, a birthday gift from when I was 10. My mother had found it at a roadside antique shop, and declared it perfect for her special girl. That was before she started referring to Abigail as her pride and joy, before she began introducing me to her friends as the one who's always buried in work, before I learned that being the youngest didn't equate to being loved the most. It merely meant being useful for a longer duration. Are you all right? I jumped. Remington, my colleague, stood by my desk, holding his mug of overly steeped green tea. I swallowed hard. Yeah, just some junk email, I replied, trying to keep my voice level. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. From them again? Senior Vice President, at 37, the youngest candidate in the company's history. A title I'd fought tooth and nail for, enduring cutthroat office politics, 12-hour workdays, and persistent oversight from men with fewer innovative ideas and more golf trophies. And yet, none of that mattered. Not to them. To them, I was the one who moved too far away, worked too hard, and forgot her roots. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Saw the invite. Want to crash it for the heck of it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, maybe it's time for a more strategic approach. I opened a browser tab I'd bookmarked weeks earlier, real estate listings. Specifically the beachfront house. The house where Abigail had taken her maternity photos. The house where my parents celebrated their 30th anniversary while I was out of state at a conference, an event they neglected to even inform me about. It was on the market, quietly. No family announcement, no group text message. The market had softened, and they were unloading it like outdated furniture. I stared at the listing, the wraparound porch, the breathtaking ocean view, the very same chairs where I used to listen to my father read Steinbeck aloud before he began pretending he couldn't hear my calls. So this was it. This was their endgame. I slowly moved the cursor over the contact agent button. My finger lingered, then clicked. The confirmation email from the realtor hadn't even fully registered when my phone rang. The same ringtone I'd assigned her years ago. The same familiar knot in my chest, tight, anticipatory, resigned. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, I said flatly, steeling myself. Kalia, darling, she began, employing that saccharine, sing-song tone she reserved for moments when she knew she was about to inflict pain, but wanted to appear polite while doing so. I didn't wait for her to continue. Let me guess. Abigail's children need the bunk room again, Or maybe Nelson's new girlfriend is allergic to hotel pillows. Silence. A long, heavy silence, during which I imagined her staring at her perfectly manicured nails, searching for the next line in her carefully crafted script. Finally, she spoke. You know how chaotic things get with young children, and we're simply limited on space this year. I wanted to laugh, not because it was humorous, but because it was so predictable. I could have written her lines myself. You understand, don't you, Kalia? She added gently, almost pathetically. It's just logistics. I recalled that same phrase from 2 years prior. Same time of year, same voice. The last time I attempted to attend, she had called the day before, whispering apologies like confessions in a dimly lit booth. You understand, don't you? She'd said. Then, too. The little ones need the bunk room. And I did understand. I understood that my presence was always optional to them. The only time I was truly needed was when someone required financial assistance. I understand perfectly, I replied. Thanks for letting me know. Before she could respond, I ended the call. But I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I simply stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with the calm composure of someone who'd anticipated this outcome. Back at my desk, I opened a spreadsheet, my personal financial statements. The numbers stared back at me, like steadfast soldiers, organized, unwavering, ready. I checked my readily accessible cash, reviewed the vesting dates of my company stock options, and examined the line item labeled discretionary assets. Then I whispered, let's play, then. Don't worry. Isabelle said she isn't coming again. Wants to make it all about herself, as usual. A few oh no texts, some laughing emojis, and one from Uncle Henry. That girl needs therapy. I stared at the screen, numb, but beneath the numbness, something else stirred. Not rage, not sadness, but clarity. They weren't merely omitting me. They were rewriting my story, transforming my absence into blame, silencing my voice, and filling the void with their own fabricated version of who I was. To them, I murmured, I'm a phantom, who abandoned the light. But I knew the truth. I hadn't abandoned warmth. I'd escaped the cold. My thoughts drifted back to the summer. I turned 10. The family had gathered at that same beachfront house. I spent hours constructing a mermaid from wet sand, complete with seaweed hair, shell earrings, and even a pebble necklace. The family gathered around, marveling at my creation. Then Abigail stepped forward, placed her hand on the mermaid's head, and smiled for the camera. She's so creative, Mom had exclaimed, clapping. I didn't correct her. Neither did Abigail. That night, I cried in the bunk room while they toasted Abigail's talent downstairs. Back in the present, I reopened the real estate app and scrolled to the beachfront house listing. No hesitation this time. I scheduled a private appointment with the realtor. No one needed to know. There would be no drama, no warning, only decisive action, quiet, precise, and irreversible. The next morning, I entered the beachfront office, a sleek, blue glass building nestled between a surf shop and a boutique cafe. A woman with graying curls and a lavender scarf rose from behind the desk. You must be Isabelle, she said warmly. I was informed you'd be stopping by today. I nodded. Thank you for fitting me in. She gestured to a chair. Oddly enough, she remarked as she accessed the listing on her tablet. Your name seems familiar. Are you related to the current owners? I looked her directly in the eyes. Yes, but not for much longer. Furniture from my first apartment, boxes labeled college, a crate of books from my corporate climbing days, and heels too tight and blazers too sharp. In the far corner sat an old cedar chest, my grandmother's. I pulled it forward and brushed off the film of time that coated it. The latch was stiff, but it yielded to my determined tug. Inside, the familiar aroma of lavender sachets she used to keep in her dresser drawers filled the air. My throat tightened. The first thing I saw was a journal, ocean blue with seashells glued to the corners in her characteristically clumsy style. I used to tease her about it. They'll fall off in a week, I'd said once, and she'd smiled. Then you'll have to glue your own truth to it. Beneath the journal was a sealed envelope addressed in her slanted handwriting. For Isabelle, open only when you stop seeking permission. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside was a letter and a trust document. The letter was brief, just a few lines. One day you'll understand why I left this for you. Love doesn't always come from those who raise us. Sometimes it finds its way through the cracks. Use this when the silence becomes unbearable. I blinked, rereading the message. The trust document was genuine, not symbolic or sentimental, but legally binding. I flipped through the pages with trembling hands. My name, her signature, Witnesses. A clause. Should the existing deed holders become financially delinquent or fail to meet property obligations, the named beneficiary reserves the right to execute a full title transfer. I didn't fully grasp it all, but I knew enough, and I knew exactly who could provide further clarification. By the time I arrived at the law offices of Harrison and West in Laguna Beach the following morning, I was already several steps ahead of where I'd been just days prior. The receptionist, Maria, offered coffee while I waited. 10 minutes later, I sat across from a senior partner in his 60s, glasses perched low on his nose, and a folder labeled Trust A. Parker Estate. He flipped through the pages with a soft whistle. This clause, he said, tapping a specific line, isn't just enforceable, it's a fail-safe. If your parents defaulted on taxes or lapsed on insurance, you don't just have leverage, you have controlling interest. And if that has already occurred, he looked at me over the rims of his glasses, then all you have to do is sign this petition. The title will transfer to you in 14 business days, unless contested, but based on what I see, they wouldn't stand a chance. I let the weight of that sink in. 14 days. The same amount of time they'd spend packing coolers and loading beach chairs, assuming the house was still theirs to decorate. That afternoon, I sat by my window with her journal in my lap. I didn't write anything. I simply traced the broken seashells along the cover, letting my fingers recall the texture of my childhood. Then I reached across my desk for the turquoise glass seashell. It had gathered dust for years, tucked behind tax receipts and unused notebooks. I placed it beside the journal. They matched, same color, same iridescence, same quiet defiance. What struck me then was the symbolism, the seashell, the journal, the clause, all the little things they thought were forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. They had. I stared at the trust documents one last time before signing. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Only ready. The lawyer handed me a copy. It's done. The transfer is underway. They have no idea, do they? I asked softly. He shook his head. They will, soon. Back home, I opened my laptop and accessed the listing for the beachfront house again. A new photo had been added, the front porch, adorned with fairy lights, prepared for summer guests. Let them plan their party. Let them arrive with gifts, guilt, and cheap wine. Let them toast to unity on a property they believed was theirs. They neglected to read the document that truly mattered. I wasn't reclaiming the house, I was invoking what was already mine. The silence after signing the petition was deceptive, almost soothing, but beneath it, something I hadn't felt in years stirred: leverage. The next morning, I brewed a strong cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and watched my inbox refresh. A new email appeared at the top. Reminder: Miller Family Retreat Final RSVP this week. It was sent from a new address, Abigail's personal email. The subject line oozed false warmth, but the email's content hit differently. Room assignments, scheduled activities, a curated Spotify playlist, even beach games labeled family versus family. And my name? Missing. Again, no mention in the thread. Not even a passing "we hope to see you there." But Abigail had CC'd everyone else. You need to see this. Her message was brief. I know you weren't included again. She created a new group. This one's worse. Attached were screenshots. A group chat titled, Core Miller Only. Abigail had posted, Isabelle's not coming again. Let's just move forward without the drama this time. Someone, probably Nelson, had replied with a laughing emoji and a gif of a peace sign. Then the final blow. Sophia's message continued. Your mother asked if I'd be comfortable staying in your old room. Said it was just sitting there anyway. I read that line twice. Your old room. The same room with my grandmother's handmade quilt. The same room with my childhood bookshelf. The mural we painted together when I was 12. The tiny brass desk where I wrote my first college essay. They weren't simply forgetting me. They were offering my essence to the wolves. I didn't cry. I sat back, closed my eyes, and let the reality of it settle in. Then I opened my real estate portal, logged into the back-end system I now legally controlled, and accessed short-term rentals, owner rights, and property scheduling. I pulled up the calendar. Only one room remained unbooked at the master suite. King bed, private deck, full ocean view. I smiled faintly and began to type. Miss I. Montgomery. Friday, 3 nights. Please place a chilled bottle of Perrier Jouet champagne. Guest prefers firm pillows, cotton sheets, and complete privacy. Click. Confirmation appeared. A ping echoed in my inbox. Their reunion, booked under my name? The irony eased my shoulders. Let's see how they explain that to each other. Later that night, I paced the living room with a glass of wine, the fireplace casting a flickering glow behind me. I scrolled through years of photo archives, family reunions where I'd taken the pictures, but never appeared in them, graduation dinners I was supposedly too busy to attend, birthdays where my gifts arrived in the mail, unwrapped and unacknowledged. One particular photo caught my eye. Abigail blowing out candles while I stood behind her, smiling. Only my head had been conveniently cropped out of the online version. That's who I'd been to them. An accessory, a utility, until I was no longer needed. I recalled my father's words years ago when I finally stood up for myself. You're just too sensitive, Isabelle. Not everything's about you, but this house, this moment, was about me. Not because I craved recognition, but because I finally held the pen and was writing myself back into the narrative. I lived for this. The beachfront house was theirs to borrow, but the key, it was already in my hand. There was one room left to reserve, the one with the view and the deed. After finalizing the reservation, I didn't linger on the confirmation screen. I closed the tab, shut the laptop, and stepped away, physically and mentally. The next morning, I drove east, away from the beach, away from the commotion, toward the hills beyond the citrus groves where Grandma was buried. No fanfare, no flowers, just a single scoop of lavender honey ice cream from the small parlor she used to frequent, balanced precariously in a sugar cone. It was tradition, a quiet one, meaningful when no one else was watching. I arrived at the cemetery just as the wind picked up, scattering dry grass across the stone rows. Her marker sat between two small rose bushes she never cared for. Too performative, she once whispered. Give me time or basil. Something useful. I smiled at the memory and sat beside her grave on the still warm grass. Hey Grandma, I said softly. They're doing it again. Why did you roll your eyes so hard? I let the wind carry the silence for a moment. Then I placed the cone in front of her nameplate and whispered, you once told me not to raise my voice, just raise my value. I did. I really did. A few minutes passed. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. The quiet had a way of holding you still, like she used to, without words, just presence. That kind of stillness doesn't come from peace. It comes from knowing who you are, even when everyone else tries to define you for their convenience. I stood, brushed off my jeans, and walked back to the car. My phone buzzed before I could start the engine. It was from the Miller family chat. A screenshot of a message glared at me. I called dibs on the master suite. Feels good to be back. Let the reunion begin. Nelson, of course. As if the room was some prize he'd earned. As if he'd built the house brick by brick and not slept his way through college on a mattress I paid for while he decimated my credit one loan at a time. Comments followed. Classic Nelson. Ooh, big dog. Claim it before the kids destroy it. I sat with the phone resting on the steering wheel, reading every single message. None of them questioned it. None of them asked who had booked the house. None of them saw me, or perhaps they simply hoped I'd remain invisible. But not this time. I opened the thread and typed, that room is already reserved, under my name. Hit send. Nothing for a long minute. Then the chat fell silent. No emojis. No laughing gifs. No follow-ups. And then, as expected, came the private message. Abigail, what are you trying to do? I stared at her words. My thumb hovered, considering. Then I typed, slowly and precisely. I'm not trying. You just never took me seriously. I watched the typing indicator appear below it, then muted the chat and blocked the thread, logged out, not from anger, but from peace, from clarity. Because when you no longer require someone else's approval to exist, you begin acting like you own the ground you walk on. And in this case, I literally did. I drove home in silence. The roads were mostly empty. Somewhere along the highway, my reflection caught in the rearview mirror. Stern, yet softer than I remembered, like something had loosened beneath the surface. Not revenge, not yet, just certainty. Later that night, I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began drafting a note to the property manager confirming my stay. I wasn't doing it for drama. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was simply living in the truth they'd ignored for years, the truth that now had a deed, a legal clause, and my name on it in bold print. They dismissed my name from every invitation for a decade. But this time, they'd have to say it, out loud, at the check-in desk. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when I pulled into a quiet overlook just half a mile from the beachfront house. I'd planned it this way, just long enough after sunset, that the house would already be buzzing with voices I wasn't invited to join. I watched their cars arrive one by one earlier that evening from my rented vehicle. Abigail's white Audi, Nelson's oversized SUV, with the tinted windows he thought made him important. And finally my mother's aging sedan, still bearing the faded proud grandma sticker on the bumper. They didn't see me. they never really had. 45 p.m. I saw them begin unloading luggage with a flurry of laughter and purposeful motion. Their voices echoed down the breezeway, distorted by the salty air. I waited, giving them just enough time to enter what used to be theirs. Then I drove forward slowly. As I approached the main reception, I could see Abigail already at the desk, animated, gesturing wildly. Nelson leaned against the marble counter, as if he owned the place, and my mother stood behind them with that familiar, pursed expression, equal parts judgment and denial. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the cool tile, just as the young woman behind the desk politely asked, "So, you're not on Miss Isabelle Montgomery's guest list?" Abigail's face contorted. "Excuse me? I don't care what system you're looking at. This is our family's house. We've been coming here for over 20 years. The receptionist's eyes flicked to mine. She blinked once, twice, then offered the faintest smile. Miss Montgomery, welcome." "I was just explaining," I heard. I stepped beside Abigail without even looking at her. "There's no need to escalate. I'll clarify." Nelson straightened. "What is this, Isabelle? Some prank? You really think this is funny?" "I think it's overdue," I said. I handed my ID to the receptionist. "The deed finalized 3 weeks ago. The house is mine." The silence that followed wasn't the kind that waits for someone to speak. It was the kind that shatters the floor beneath you. Iris clutched her purse tighter. You bought it? That's impossible." "No, Mom," I said gently, but not softly. "It's legal, it's clean, and it's final. You should have checked the mail, or the trust agreement. Grandma left me." Abigail turned a shade I'd only ever seen on wilted roses. "Why would you do this? You knew we were planning the reunion. This was meant to be our space, and I was meant to be your daughter, your sister," I said. "But you left me off every email, every invite, every photo, so I found my own way in." The receptionist looked between us, visibly unsure whether to retreat or remain. Nelson barked out a laugh, the kind that masked panic. "You think you can just kick us out? You think you've won something?" I turned to him slowly. "No, Nelson. I think I reclaimed something. That's different." Then I looked at the desk clerk and said calmly, "Please help escort anyone not listed on my guest registry. Be kind, of course, their family." A moment of hesitation. Then she nodded and picked up the phone to call security. "Not urgent, just standard," as if this were any normal check-in process. "I'll contest this," Trinity muttered behind me. "You'll hear from our lawyer. You might want to review the clause on defaulted taxes and failed maintenance first," I replied, still facing forward. "You might be surprised by how much was already in motion before you even clicked send on your guest list." My mother stepped forward, her voice quiet. "You really hate us that much?" I turned. For a moment, I let the silence linger. Then I said what needed to be said, not cruelly, not bitterly, just honestly. "I don't hate you. I just stopped hoping you'd change." With that, I walked toward the elevator, the sound of their confusion dissolving behind me like salt in the wind. As the doors slid closed, I felt my breath slow, not in relief, but in readiness. Because what came next wasn't silence, it was war. I had just finished making tea in the quiet of the kitchen when the knock came, not on my door, but on the glass window facing the beach. Not the kind of knock from a guest or neighbor. This one came with the blinding pulse of a news van's headlights behind it. I stepped closer, pulling the curtain slightly. A man with a microphone and that slick, camera-ready smile was already positioning himself for the lens. Another crew member pointed directly at the house, at me. I didn't need to hear the opening lines to know how the segment would go. The moment I opened the front door, the reporter's voice hit me like a wave. "Miss Montgomery, can you confirm whether you coerced your elderly father into signing over the family property? Sources say he wasn't of sound mind." The red light of the camera blinked steadily and unforgivingly. I didn't answer, not with words. I closed the door and walked away. By the time I reached the living room, my phone was vibrating with a ferocity I hadn't felt since the day I discovered my name was omitted from the will. Again, there were texts from former neighbors, co-workers, a cousin I hadn't heard from since our grandmother's funeral. "Is any of this true?" And then the email, a pre-injunction notice. "Occupancy of 404 Ocean Crest Boulevard must cease, immediately pending court review. Violation may result in financial penalty." And the final insult? A screenshot Sophia forwarded, Abigail's latest post. "A woman who turns on her own family was never raised with love to begin with. I pray for her soul." Underneath were comments filled with fire emojis, sad face reactions, and so sorry, praying for your family notes from people who hadn't known my name until yesterday. I stared at it all, the phone in my hand, the headlines forming without me. I should have been prepared, but nothing quite prepares you for being publicly labeled a predator, especially by people who once kissed your scraped knees and braided your hair. I didn't cry, not immediately. I sat down in the stillness of the master suite and looked across the room at a framed photograph I hadn't packed away yet. Me at 7, clinging to my father's leg, both of us laughing so hard the photo came out blurred. A time before silence replaced softness. Was I that same girl? Would he even recognize me now? The tears came, but they didn't belong to sadness. They belonged to a grief that had matured into something older, something weary. Hours passed, maybe more. The house was still. The ocean roared outside, like an unmoved witness. I found myself wandering the built-in bookshelf by the staircase, running my hand along the wood grooves. My fingers brushed against something tucked behind a row of old novels. Was a small seashell, pale ivory, with a faint blue stripe, the one he'd helped me find the summer before Abigail went to college. You deserve everything good this world can give you, he had said that day, resting it in my palm, as if it were the rarest thing he'd ever seen. I closed my fingers around it, whispering, "You said that once." But the man who said it no longer existed, not in the court documents filed under his name, not in the media frenzy that followed his daughter's signature. That version of him had been overwritten, and so had I. They'd painted me as a villain, so thoroughly it almost made me forget who I truly was. They wanted war. Let's start with the truth. And then came the files, screenshots, dozens of them, family group chats, private email threads, notes passed between my sister and mother. Abigail mocking me for being emotionally fragile. My mother writing, "She's too busy being important to care about family. Don't feel bad, excluding her. She's used to being alone." My hands were still. I didn't gasp, didn't scream, but I felt a pulse in my chest that hadn't been there in days, like breath finding its way back through cracked ribs. So this was the game. They hadn't just left me out. They'd spent years erasing me behind closed doors. I looked down at the seashell again. This wasn't the moment I'd been crushed. This was the moment I began writing the rest of the story. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank document, and titled it with the date, and I typed, "The truth as preserved in digital ash." The silence they demanded all those years had taught me one thing they'd never learn: how to outlast them. Because I had patience, receipts, and now, a reason. And I wasn't cornered anymore. Linked to next chapter, I'd been cornered before. This time, I came prepared. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. Not stormy, not bright, just the kind of overcast that mutes everything, as if the world were holding its breath. I walked into the courthouse enveloped in silence. No entourage, no lawyers in Armani suits, just me, in a navy dress Grandma once called steel-willed blue, and a simple folder clutched to my chest. Everything I needed was in that folder, and everything they'd hoped would never surface. Inside the courtroom, the air held the distinct sterile chill I remembered from settling Grandma's estate, a place where family pretended to be civilized while the knives remained hidden beneath smiles. Iris sat 2 rows ahead, stiffer than usual. Her eyes didn't waver when I entered. Abigail was there too, in an all-white pantsuit that looked like it cost a month's rent in Laguna Beach. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from the way her blazer sat on her back. Nelson, predictably, was absent, probably hiding behind a cease and desist draft. Montgomery vs. Parker, petition for injunction against the sale of family real estate, under claims of manipulation and elder exploitation. The judge looked up from his notes, adjusted his glasses, and nodded toward Abigail's side. "Counsel?" Her lawyer stood, slick, young, too smooth for his own good. "Your Honor, the petitioner contends that Ms. Isabelle Montgomery exploited her father during a period of declining health, resulting in the unauthorized transfer of deed rights to the property in question." He paused just long enough, before exploited, as if the word carried significant weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's desk. "And you, Miss Montgomery?" I stood slowly, unfolded the top flap of my folder. "With the court's permission," I said, "I'd like to present video and audio evidence of consent and family dynamics relevant to this case." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom dimmed slightly as the bailiff cued the video. It was shot on a sunny porch, 2 years prior. My father sat beside me, sipping coffee, his voice clear and unmistakably sound. "I want Isabelle to have this place. She's the only one who came back for me after the fall. She's the only one who ever asked how I was doing, not what I could give. The camera panned to me. I wasn't crying then, but I was close. Are you sure? I asked softly. I'm sure. They always made her feel like a guest. She's not a guest. She's the legacy. Let her rot in her condo. She was never part of this family. Not really. If she wanted in, she should have been easier to control. The judge raised an eyebrow, looking directly at Abigail. She tried to sit taller, but shrank within that designer suit. After a long silence, he leaned forward. This court finds no basis for the petition. The video shows full mental clarity and intent. The audio displays targeted exclusion. Miss Montgomery acted lawfully and ethically. He paused, then added with a firm edge, this court is not here to resolve decades of resentment, nor to validate cruelty disguised as tradition. Case dismissed. Abigail froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. Iris stared straight ahead, as pale as the collar of her blazer. I gathered my folder and left without looking back. Outside, the media buzzed like flies on honey. Miss Montgomery, any comment? I turned toward them, only once. Sometimes the only way to break a cycle, I said, is to walk away holding your truth. The flashbulbs clicked, but I kept walking down the steps, past the polished marble, onto the sidewalk, and then toward my car, parked near the courthouse lawn. There was no applause, no swelling violin soundtrack, just my own quiet steps, and a breeze that finally smelled like salt again. I stopped for a moment at the edge of the parking lot, let the wind catch my hair, closed my eyes, and listened, not for approval, not for closure, but for the sound of my own breath. They had their narrative. I had the truth, and that day, the truth didn't shout. It won. Link to next chapter. As the wind picked up across the dunes, I realized the beachfront house was never the reward. I was. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the ocean air had shifted, saltier, somehow softer, the kind of breeze that didn't just brush against your skin. It reminded you to breathe deeper. I stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the last few months fall away, grain by grain. The beachfront house stood before me, sunlit and quiet. For years, I'd driven past it with my eyes averted. Now, the keys in my hand didn't feel like a trophy. They felt like something older, something I'd once lost and had to grow strong enough to deserve again. Inside, the place looked as if someone had left in a hurry, a water glass half full,